Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 117 today. And I am here with my guest, Laurie Spencer. She's coming on my show for a second time. How are you doing today, Laurie?
I'm great. It's great to be back, Welsh. Thanks for having me.
What have you been up to today? Anything much?
Yeah, doing some family things. You know, this is the 4th of July weekend here in the United States, and this is when we all like to celebrate our independence and our freedom and our liberty, whatever there is left of it. Um, but we get together with the family. I'm actually, just enjoying some family time today and taking it easy on a Sunday.
Oh, wow. That sounds so lovely. Are you guys going to be having a lot of food and a lot of fireworks where you're at?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's fireworks going off right outside my window right now. So while we're talking, if you hear some pop, pop, boom, boom in the background, don't worry. It's not a shootout. It's just fireworks, folks. It's what we do on the 4th of July.
Yeah, there's been a lot of crime going around in the United States. But yeah, I would love to go to America and watch, a lot of the fireworks display. What state would you say, Laurie, has the best fireworks display out of all the United States on July the 4th?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I mean, we have some nice ones in Texas, up in South Dakota, Mount Rushmore. They do a beautiful 4th of July. You might remember Donald Trump did when he was president, I think in 2020, it was during the pandemic. He did his 4th of July celebration there at Mount Rushmore, and that was beautiful. And also Washington, D.C., right there on the National Mall, has a patriotic, I think they call it a Capitol 4th, that they've been doing every year for as long as I've been alive. That's usually what we're all watching on television over here in the States on the 4th.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah, I would love to, do that. British myself, well, even though I'm Welsh, you So Laurie, speaking of that, what have you been up to on your podcast lately and with Maverick News? What have you been doing?
Well, we had a great show last night. Our friend Kevin Michelizzi, who's a cyber war and information war specialist, he's actually an American from Minnesota who now lives in Crimea, Russia. And that's a fascinating story, but he's a great source and a great reporter for us at Maverick News. And so after this Wagner rebellion, attempted coup, whatever you want to call it, whatever happened in Russia last week, he had some really great intel and information for us from the ground in Russia. So that was exciting yesterday.
What does he say life is like in Crimea? What did he say like the life was like in Crimea compared to like what it is now under control under Russia, like with it being occupied by Russia? Sorry, what did he say life is like under Russia than what it was under Ukraine? Is it better under Russia or was it better under Ukraine?
I don't think Kevin would know because he moved to Crimea after it became part of Russia. I think he went there in 2018 or 2019, so it was already part of Russia. I don't know if he's got the frame of reference, but his wife does because she is from there, and she's Ukrainian, I believe. So they're there in the war zone. Crimea is disputed territory. It's territory that Ukraine has made clear they want back, and the Russians are like, "Well, we ain't moving." So come and take it if you think you can.
I heard a report that the director of the CIA at the end of the year is planning to do one result. Of course, take this with a pinch of salt because you never know, what goes online. There could be fake news that can be spread from both the left, the right, and the middle. And he was talking about, potentially, them like sending rockets into Crimea to take Crimea back from Russia, like actually going on one last assault to take back Crimea. What is your opinion toward that, Laurie?
I think that would be a fatal error. I don't think that they should even try that. And, there's a reason that NATO hasn't made any big military campaigns on Crimea or even around Crimea in the sea. It's a very bad idea. Russia has that area heavily fortified. And as my friend Kevin Michelizzi has told me, most of Crimea is one big military base. There's a huge concentration of Russian Navy, Russian troops all across Crimea and the peninsula. So I wouldn't try that if I were you. It's not a good idea. There's a
No.
reason they haven't.
What other information did he share to you that was very interesting?
I thought the most interesting thing was, when we talked to Kevin, we expected to hear that the Russian people were frantic, that they were concerned about their government being overthrown, or, a military response. And the way Kevin put it to me was that life goes on as normal. He was in Moscow the day that all of this was happening last Saturday. It just so happened he was going to Moscow anyway. He passed through the checkpoint at the border of Rostov-on-Don, where all of this, Wagner thing was unfolding. He was there, and he was in Moscow after that. He said basically it was just another day in Moscow. They weren't under martial law. There were not troops
I
on the
know.
streets.
It
All
was
the
so
stuff
funny.
that we were
Like
being
when,
told
when I
over here
was
in the media was a lie. They were
when I was
literally
like
lying to us.
watching some of the Twitter videos, like seeing Wagner go. And now look, there were some people that died. Don't get me wrong. There were like videos of a helicopter getting shut down, and that was terrible. Rest in peace to those victims. I think it's bad. It's terrible. But apart from that, I mean, Wagner definitely is guilty of that. Apart from that, though, when they're in what's it called, Razanov, the area, I saw the video of like them in the tanks, and like like the Wagner group, they weren't going around, they weren't smashing up buildings, they weren't causing riots, they weren't disrupting people. They were being very respectful towards the people. And now, look, there were a few scuffles, maybe, but that was because, of course, some people were telling them, "Hey, that happens." That's all. There was even a video of like the Wagner group going to get lunch and dinner and stuff. And when they went to the military base, when they went to like they took over the military building, you didn't see them go around killing people. You didn't see them go around doing any of that stuff. If this was, let's say, like a bunch of CIA mercenaries, if this was like a coup that was funded by the CIA, which you could argue was, if this was like, a group that was funded by the CIA, they would have gone, killed a lot of the group and would have gone on and messed up the towns, something like Black Lives Matter did, or something, like or what the Ukrainian group,
Like
far
the
right group did.
Maidan. Yeah, I
The
was
Maidan, like the
expecting another
Maidan, or
Maidan
Libya,
in
or
Moscow.
Syria, or like Vietnam. Just pretty much all those inside jobs in history. It just shows you that.
Right, right. And, Scott Ritter opines that the CIA may have had a hand in manipulating Prigozhin. And I think that's an interesting theory. Would make a lot of sense that the attack on his camp that got him so upset in the first place probably was
Did
not the
did
Russians
you
attacking
think
the camp. It might have been
did
Ukrainians or some of our guys.
did you think that that was Russians who attacked him, or do you think it was Ukrainians? And do you think that a lot of the Western media was like lying to Prigozhin? Do you think they were lying a lot to him, like trying to manipulate him?
Yes, I do. I do not believe that the Russians attacked the Wagner camp. It doesn't make sense. It makes about as much sense as the Russians attacking their own pipeline or attacking their own dams. It just doesn't make sense to attack the fighting force that you depend on so much. So I do not think that Russia did it. Russia has denied that they did it. But yet no one has come forward to claim responsibility for that attack. And that in itself makes me suspicious. It makes me think, maybe this is a CIA job. And that's just the sort of false flag operation that you would expect from the CIA to attack Prigozhin's camp and feed him, bullshit through various sources to make him think that Russia was responsible in some way. And then they could manipulate what they thought was going to be a coup or a regime change in Russia using the Wagner forces to do it. But what they didn't count on was that most of the Wagner forces remained loyal to their country, to their leader, and to Russia. They weren't about to get involved in such a thing. And
What do
over
you
here
think?
in the West, we were being told this big lie that
Oh yeah,
all
absolutely. There was another news
50,000, they
article.
were saying like Wagner's got 50,000 men coming to Moscow. And then that number started to shrink. And there was, well, actually 30,000. Oh, okay. 20,000. Then 10,000. Then eventually they settled on the number of 5,000 troops that were headed towards Moscow last Saturday. And as that was unfolding, Welsh, I was, on that big Twitter space with Mario Nawfal watching it all unfold. And I was thinking to myself, you're dreaming if you think you're going to take Moscow with only 5,000 men.
Lori,
It's just not possible. You can't do that.
what do you think would have happened? Let's just say this. Let's just say a scenario where the worst case scenario did end up happening, where there was a fight that broke out between Wagner and the Russian army. What do you think that would have been like if Prigozhin had decided to go around and smash up the buildings and in Rostov? And do you think he would have been able to take, Russia? Do you think he would have been able to take over Putin? And what do you think about the allegations of a lot of people saying that, Wagner was going around blowing up cars, taking down helicopters? And what do you think about the scandals where Western media was saying that they were getting very close to Moscow and them saying that the Russian airspace defense is absolutely garbage? What is your opinion on that?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that they stood a snowball's chance in hell of taking Moscow, of overthrowing Putin. The Russian military is serious, and they still have plenty of troops right there in Russia guarding the homeland, and plenty that are guarding Moscow. And it's just like we saw last month, Welsh, when we saw the drone attack on the Kremlin just before the Victory Day parade in early May. And then during the Victory Day parade on May 9th, we know that at least 3 Ukrainian drones were aiming at Red Square, and they were literally trying to attack the Victory Day parade, which in my mind is just suicidally stupid.
It is very stupid for President Zelensky
You've got
to do
to
that.
anticipate what the Russians are going to do if you do a thing like that. And if Prigozhin or whoever was behind him were literally pushing him to effect a regime change in Russia, in Moscow, what were they going to do? Storm the Kremlin?
Nah, that wasn't going to happen. Moscow
not going to happen.
It would have, though, been bad if there had been a fight between them. That would have absolutely been bad. There would have been people who would have died, and
yes,
and it would have not been.
That tragedy was averted, and it was averted because of the outstanding leadership of Vladimir Putin. I have to be completely honest and tell you, I'm not a Putin fangirl. I'm not, cheering and saying he's the greatest thing ever, but you have to have respect for a leader like Putin, who brought this coup, basically a bloodless one, even though some soldiers did lose their lives. It could have been so much worse. And he stopped this within a matter of hours. And he did not,
with the help of the Belarusian president, Alexander.
Yes, Lukashenko.
Yeah. Do you know, I actually read something about Alexander, that the WEF Bank actually offered Alexander money to actually put his country into lockdown, and he refused. He said, nah. And actually, funny thing is, I didn't know this. Belarus was actually a country, they might have had 1 or 2 lockdowns, but they actually didn't go into strict lockdown. Life continued, and they said a lot of people were dying in Belarus. And you look at the videos, and no, there were people still living and all that stuff. And Belarus is quite a good-looking country. It's thriving economically. It's getting stronger, and they've got nukes too, which is going to be. I mean, if Poland or Hungary try to do anything. But going back to that, Lori, when you see Vladimir Putin being able to handle, especially when the Western media is labeling him as this crazy man, when you see Vladimir Putin being able to handle the coup situation, okay, I'll put a scenario for him. Let's just say, how he was able to handle the coup situation with the Wagner group, and how he's been able to handle the drone attack and stuff, whether it has been an assassination attempt on him. What is your opinion towards Putin, being able to handle that? And what do you think would have happened if you had something like that, let's say, happen in the United States, where you had a far left group, let's say, take the Capitol building or take like 5 Capitol buildings in the United States, and they were a really powerful group, a really powerful military group? Do you think if it happened in the United States, it would be like civil war? And do you think they would be as tolerant, and as good as the Russians? Or do you think they would go around smashing up buildings? And do you think the United States would end up going into civil war?
Well, look what happened on January 6th, right? I mean, we have how many people have we thrown in prison on long prison sentences for merely being at the Capitol, even if they didn't break any serious laws other than trespassing or unauthorized access? The only person who got killed on January 6th was a unarmed female protester named Ashley Babbitt. In Russia, when you compare that and look at Putin's response so far as I know, Putin hasn't thrown anybody in the gulag. He hasn't gone full Joseph Stalin, which is what the West was expecting him to do. They thought he was going to have these guys in front of a firing squad, right? Their acts were, in my mind, treasonous. And many say that Putin isn't being tough enough on the Wagner rebels. He's called them mutineers. He considers this a mutiny, and the punishment for that should be very, very severe. And it seems to me he's taking a pretty steady and gentle hand with this whole thing, really. We have yet to see how their cases will play out in the courts, but at least he's giving them a court date and a fair trial.
When is the court date going to be?
No idea. But we do know that most of the Wagner forces, I believe, are just signing up, with the regular Russian military. They've made it clear that they were not on board with Prigozhin's coup. They wanted nothing to do with that. They remained loyal to Russia. So to my mind, this really sounds like a small group of troublemakers. Kevin's estimate was less than 1,000 men were involved in that rebellion. And from what I've seen, that sounds about right to me. I'd say this was not 5,000. It certainly wasn't all 50,000. I think we're probably talking less than 1,000 guys.
Fair enough. Well, that's pretty interesting. So after, what is your opinion on the article that was done? I think it was done by The Atlantic, maybe, where that girl was saying that this was going to be the next Russian Civil War. What was it called? What they called at the time? It was
the Anne Applebaum piece. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, the Anne Applebaum piece. What is your opinion towards that? Like saying it was going to be the next, what's it called? The next TAAR.
Wishful thinking. On her part. Right. It's amazing to me, Welsh, how these Western pundits and so-called journalists, especially last Saturday while the event was unfolding, I don't know if you were listening to that big Twitter space with Mario Nawfal, but there were a lot of Western propagandists on there, pro-Ukraine and pro-NATO propagandists, guys like Malcolm Nance. And of course, they were just practically masturbating during this thing. Like, we finally got him. We finally got him. We're finally going to get Putin. And then they didn't. And it was really funny, actually, to watch their narratives fall apart. I thought some of them were going to cry while we were on the Twitter space. When that convoy stopped outside of Moscow city limits and they negotiated a peaceful ending to this whole thing, there were so many of these warmongers just disappointed. I thought they were going to cry. They were denied the coup that they lusted for so much.
It was absolutely insane, but Russia, I really approve Putin. I think he really did a good job handling it, because I don't think anybody in the West, I think if this scenario happened in the United States, you would have had, basically, I'm talking like about a scenario that was worse than, like the 6th, like even worse, just as crazier, and I think United States, you would have seen, people die. It would have ended up potentially having civil unrest, basically like Black Lives Matter, but even worse, the United States.
Yeah.
And, the fact you can see people in, the streets cleaning it up, the fact, that those tank drivers were respecting the cleaners is just, you wouldn't see that in the West. they would get shot, the cleaners, if they try to like go against a far left group, or it was the cartels. Speaking of that, Laurie, where do you see this going on? Because I have heard. So, what is your like a full opinion on this? So, a lot of people are saying the Wagner coup was like basically some people say that Bogosian and Putin were working on this together. It was an inside job. They were doing this, to work together to pretty much, can you hear me all right, Laurie?
Yep, loud and clear. You're good.
Sorry, I thought my thing was acting a bit strange. They were basically, let's just say, a lot of people say that they were working together, that this was an inside job, and a lot of people say that, especially, with Alexander, the president of Belarus, came out of nowhere and then pretty much, didn't come out of nowhere. He pretty much made a deal. Some people have a theory because, of course, Wagner now has been moved to Belarus. Some people have this theory that Putin is going to use this as a thing, to somehow, take down Belarus, to somehow, march Wagner into Poland. And especially Poland right now is getting a bit worried, and there's rumors that Poland are going to get nukes. What is your feeling on the conspiracy? Do you believe it's true? And do you believe that Wagner would go after Kiev or no?
Well, I don't subscribe to that theory that this was some sort of inside job, between Putin and and Wagner. I don't see that. I could tell just from the expression in Putin's eyes during that televised address he gave last Saturday about this, that he was genuinely angry, really angry at this act of rebellion. And of course, it brings dishonor and discord into the Russian military, which is something you don't need in a time of war. If there was ever a time
which
when
is
you needed unity, it's at wartime. So it's just devastating, and it's embarrassing to Russia, even though it ended peacefully. And I think that Putin is more popular than ever with the Russian people after this thing happened. They support their country and they support their president. And this is something that we Western folks, Americans, we can't understand because we don't trust our government anymore. But it's different in Russia. Most people trust their government in Russia. They trust their president. They support their president. That's a foreign concept to us Americans, right? We're always divided right down the middle. It's been a long time since we've had a president who had more than 50% of public support consistently. And, Putin's been in power on and off for almost 25 years. So he's had a lot of time.
He wasn't president of Russia from 2012 to 2014. He did take a bit of a break from being president.
Yeah, right. And of course, now they've changed the Constitution so he can hold as many terms as he gets elected to. And he's up for re-election again in, I think, next March of 2024. And I think he'll win his election once again by a large margin.
So, what is your opinion with Poland getting nukes? Do you think we're going to see a scenario where maybe the United States might put an inside job where they might get Poland to have something go on against Belarus, and do you think they might try to find a way to get Belarus and Poland to pop off of each other? And how disastrous do you think that would be?
Oh God, I hadn't even really given that much thought, but that's a scary thought. Let's hope that doesn't happen. That would be absolutely insane. But I wouldn't put anything past them at this point, Welsh. They're very desperate. I mean, they're literally talking about they're setting the stage over here in the American press, and probably there too, where they're trying to say that Russia plans to blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're not going to do that, but they're setting the stage for a false flag where our guys, the Ukrainians, will probably do it, and then they'll blame Russia to, kick this war up another notch. That is consistently what.
And then it will activate Article 5. Isn't that correct?
No, because this is Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine is not technically a member of NATO. Now, if it were to happen in Poland, that's another story. Yes, that would trigger Article 5.
What would happen if Article 5 got triggered? Because I had read a bit of it, but I'm not. What do you know about it?
Basically, that means World War III. It means that
Oh, wow.
NATO countries and our armed forces would be in the fight, involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, United States armies, they're already on the ground fighting against Ukrainians. Same thing of Polish, same thing of French soldiers. They're already there on the ground fighting them.
Special forces, yes, and mostly mercenary groups, professional soldiers, soldiers of fortune. We've got a lot of those over there, and nobody really knows how many because those are not public. And that's our new way of fighting wars. It's how we do it quietly without the public knowing. When it's a military involvement, of course, they are supposed to disclose that by law, how many troops we have in a particular place. But when it's off the books, like this is, who knows how many mercenaries we have over there? There's no way to know until somebody gets killed, and then we hear about that or taken prisoner.
And especially, with the amount of money that the United States are losing, the military of the United States is just about out of armor because of the war in Ukraine. It's like,
but
don't know how they can
then
get
you
funding
see
there.
what the scam of this whole thing is, and it's really a great money laundering scheme.
Oh, it is for BlackRock.
If you think
Did
like
you
a criminal,
Hey,
I mean, if we
Lori,
just
did you
take
see the video?
our old military equipment that's outdated and almost obsolete, and just give that to the Ukrainians, and then the Ukrainians are on the hook to pay for that stuff, and we get brand new stuff made for us by our friends in the military industrial complex. So it's a win-win. All the big boys make money, all the fat cats get rich, and the Ukrainians die, and hardly a quart of American blood is even spilled. So they look at that as a win. That's how they see it.
So, Lori, how do you see the Ukrainian war ending? Do you think there'll be a peace deal? Do you think there'll end up being a nuclear bomb that goes off? Or do you think that Ukraine will surrender entirely? How do you see this going?
Well, I'm ever the optimist, my friend. So I don't see the planet going up in nuclear flames. I know that's a possibility, but it's one that I refuse to accept. I continue to push for peace. I'm very happy that we currently have at least two candidates in the presidential race who say that they're committed to bringing peace and ending this war immediately, Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So I feel like there's at least some hope on the horizon for the future. But my concern is that we still have another year and a half to wait for our next president. We still have to have an election. And until then, we know that we're stuck probably with Joe Biden and this administration and Anthony Blinken and Victoria Nuland and all these neocons and warmongers who intend to keep this war going and milking it for as long as they can. And God only knows the way they keep escalating it, it could turn nuclear. So I'm a realist, but I'm also an optimist. And I know that the tide of public opinion is starting to turn against our support for Ukraine, because Americans are getting the bill and they're feeling it.
Americans could be using that money for healthcare, social development. They could easily solve their problems if they didn't have the military-industrial complex or the Federal Reserve, and that money was going towards, all the good things in America that it should be.
Right. And we're also feeling it in the inflation crunch. We feel it every time we gas up our car, every time we go to the grocery store or pay the rent or pay the utility bills. Everything's just going through the roof, up, 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 up. And Americans are finally starting to make the connection in their heads that this inflation is a direct result of the military spending in Ukraine. That this is unsustainable. We can't keep doing this.
Absolutely not. You definitely. Lori, do you know how I see the war ending?
Yeah, what do you think?
I think what will happen is, as we get closer to the 2024 election, I think with the more public opinion now moving away from supporting Ukraine, like you just said, and especially with more people, and especially with Biden losing his power and becoming more demented and stuff, I think what will happen is Biden will step down, Kamala Harris will come in, will replace him. And I think what will happen is the United States media will come in, and what will happen is the United States will realize that, they're losing the war against Ukraine, because it's not just us that's getting affected. Also the globalist elite and the bankers, they're losing money a lot from this war in Ukraine too. And I get the feeling they're going to realize the war in Ukraine is not winnable. And I think what will happen is the funding to the Ukrainians, it will end, it will stop. And I think what will happen is the more that Ukraine keeps fighting, the more that Ukrainians, get put in the front line against the Russian army. I think what will happen is in Ukraine, the Ukrainians will get fed up because of the loss of food, the loss of, transport, and the loss of men. And they'll be like to President Zelensky, enough's enough. We don't want to be on this war anymore. And I think what will happen is President Zelensky will then realize we can't win this war. And I think what will happen is the BRICS nations will come in and say, look, enough of this. And I think what will happen is Eastern Ukraine, there'll end up being a peace treaty where Eastern Ukraine will go to Russia, and the Western Ukraine will stay in Ukraine, and the south of Ukraine will end up going to some parts of Poland. But I think Western Ukraine, I think what will happen is President Zelensky will then end up, no longer being president. And I think Western Ukraine will end up being just a dump, because I think what the elites are going to do, I think they're going to ditch this war. And I think they'll ditch this war in the beginning of 2024. And I think come 2025, I really think they're going to be focusing on going to war with China, Taiwan. I think that's going to be the next big thing.
Mm-hmm. They're already making the pivot to China. They're making it clear that that's the next big war objective, is the Taiwan issue. And I think you're right, that that's probably how this will end ultimately in the peace treaty and the division of the land. Although I have to tell you myself personally, I wish that that was not going to be the outcome, because I'm deeply concerned, as I'm sure Vladimir Putin would be, about Nazis on his doorstep. Again, even if he just settles for the eastern bit of Ukraine that he's already taken, the problem is, historically, for 100 years, the Ukrainian nationalists, the Nazis in Ukraine, they've always been in the western part of Ukraine. That's their stronghold. It's Lviv, it's Kiev, it's all points west of there. It's Galicia, which used to be part of Poland. My concern is that if that land is returned to Polish territory, it still doesn't solve the problem.
I actually
Nazis on his doorstep, and it also, unfortunately, would then make that part of Ukraine part of NATO, because Poland is a NATO country.
Yeah,
so things will flare up again at some point in the future. Although next time it's literally NATO on Russia's doorstep, which is the whole thing we've been trying to avoid all along. That's what the Minsk Accords were about. That's what the agreement was in 1991. When we reunited Germany.
What Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said, the United States promised they wouldn't put NATO near the Soviet Union's borders, and they broke that promise.
Not 1 inch to the east is what the deal was, and then we broke the deal. So, it's going to happen again, and we have to have an eye on the future. I'm a historian, so I always have my eye on the past. And the last time that I was here with you, we did a big, long, wonderful conversation about the history of this war, going all the way back 100 years to the beginning of the Ukrainian nationalists, the OUN, the UPA, the Banderites, and just how far
Stefan Bandera.
Right. Yes. And so this is an old problem. This has been there for 100 years. And Russia, or the Soviet Union in the last century, tried to deal with it. Unfortunately, they failed to wipe out the Ukrainian nationalists that were always there at their door, working with the CIA, working with MI6 to try and bring down the Soviet Union. Now, in the 21st century, those Ukrainian nationalists are still there, And they're becoming increasingly powerful because this time they have NATO behind them. This time they have the Americans behind them. And this problem is not going to be solved on a simple piece of paper like the Minsk Accord, which turned out not to be worth the paper it was written on because both parties didn't follow it. And so if we do that again, just to bring a convenient and quick end to this war, it's really not solving the problem. It just means that Poland gets some new territory and Putin gets some new territory. But the original problem remains. The Ukrainian nationalists, the Nazis are still there, and they'll be back. They'll be back.
So what do you think would be the ideal situation? Do you think if Putin was to come in and make a deal, do you think that would have to be for him to say, look, Ukraine, denazify, no more, enough's enough, we're not putting, how would you see it?
If I were Vladimir Putin, yes, I would insist upon that clause of any agreement that there will be denazification. And by that, and this is, I'm just going to put this in Scott Ritter's words because we recently did an interview with Scott and I agree with everything he said. So I'm just going to let Scott do the talking. What he said, and I agree, is we need a program of denazification that comes from the Ukrainian people. It can't be Russia forcing it on them because that will only breed more resistance to Russia. It has to be something that the Ukrainian people want, where they say, no, we don't like our government being led by Nazis. We don't like Nazi ideology. We reject it. And to tear down those statues of Stefan Bandera, to tear down all of those monuments to Nazis, to completely erase Nazism from their culture, from their schools, to do a complete denazification process. Otherwise, this peace is not going to last very long. If you don't get to the root of the problem, the peace will not last. And the problem is Nazism.
What is your opinion toward, because some people say that Russia has a Nazi problem, but what is your opinion towards that? Because actually Russia banned a lot of its neo-Nazi parties, like the Soviet Union Party. I think it was not Soviet Union Party, sorry, the Slavic Union Party. There was another far-right party they banned. And also Russia celebrates a day where they had victory against the Nazis, which is called the Pride Day in St. Petersburg, But then yet Ukraine has had many streets that are named after, Nazis. And President Lizinski, didn't say anything to apologize to Ukraine, to Polish people for, the massacre that Ukrainian Nazis committed against Polish people in World War II.
Right. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians continue to push the phony Holodomor story as a way to point the finger at Russia and say, oh, forget about all those Nazi war crimes. What the Soviets did to us was much worse. And of course, the Holodomor has been completely debunked by serious.
What was that story about? I've never heard of that.
You don't know about the Holodomor? It's a famine that occurred in Ukraine, mostly eastern Ukraine, in the 1930s. And it was during the collectivization program of Stalin, where he was trying to end a famine by gaining government control over the farms and industrializing the farming production. But there were some farmers who didn't want to give up their land, long story short. And that apparently, as they say, provoked Stalin to withhold the grain and withhold the food from them. And they went hungry and died. So that's a story that I would probably refer you to historians like Grover Furr, who wrote a terrific book debunking the lie that is often told in the West about the Holodomor. But, it's just another way to distract the public from what the Nazis actually did. And there's a lot of rewriting of history, going on in Ukraine. And there has been really ever since World War II, but especially in the last 30 years, where they take these Nazi war criminals and try to rehabilitate their image. And now they're
like for Operation
Paper, Yeah,
for
they're freedom
Operation
fighters now.
Operation Paperclip, all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
just, and also allowing, some Nazis to become the head of like NASA or the head of NATO. It's just
Yep.
absolutely insane.
Yep. But that's what we did. It's crazy, but it's true. And it's verified in the government archives. Even the government admits it now. It just took them a long time to admit it, though. We didn't find out about most of this until the 1990s when those documents were finally declassified. But, and we talked about that last time I was here. We talked about the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, which is a 1998 law passed by Congress here in the United States, forcing the CIA and military intelligence to finally declassify and release documents that they had on file, had been keeping secret for, almost half a century, about our collaboration with Nazi war criminals after World War II and how the CIA protected these guys from prosecution at Nuremberg. And there's an interesting thing about Nuremberg. When you really look at the big picture of how many Nazis and how many Nazi war criminals there were who should have been prosecuted, there should have been thousands prosecuted at Nuremberg. But that's not what actually happened. In reality, I think it was only 27.
Yeah,
27 that were
it was
actually
27.
prosecuted at Nuremberg. And they were all German, and not a single one of them was Ukrainian. Now, you have to ask yourself why, because they had plenty of Nazi war criminals and butchers in Ukraine who committed horrific acts of terror and mass murder, and yet they were spared prosecution. And now we know, thanks to the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, why they were not prosecuted at Nuremberg. It's because we, our CIA, and the MI6 in Great Britain protected them, got them out of those prisoner of war camps, and brought them to places like Canada, the United States, South America, and kind of spread them out all over the world, where they had a lot of support and help from the Catholic Church, from the Vatican. And the Vatican would help them get new passports, new identities, help them travel, give them money to travel, and set them up with a new life somewhere else. So we did that. And that's the reason why, because the Ukrainians were our friends during the Cold War. We looked at those guys as our first line of defense against the Soviets, right? And they were useful to us, not only in doing anti-Soviet propaganda, but also in doing actual guerrilla warfare inside the Soviet Union. Those that were able to stay in the Soviet Union and weren't chased out, captured, or killed by Stalin and later Khrushchev. There was an effort made in the Soviet Union to round these Banderites up and to put them in the gulag so that they couldn't cause any more trouble. And they got a lot of them, but they obviously did not get them all. They did get Stefan Bandera. He was killed by an assassin's cyanide bullet in 1959. KGB assassin got him in Munich. But it's interesting to note that his assassination occurred one day after the CIA had just arranged for him to get a visa to travel to the United States. Let that sink in. So in other words, the KGB knew about it. They knew that the CIA was about to bring Stefan Bandera to the United States, just as they had with his buddy Mykola Lebed. And they'd already brought him to the U.S. So they were looking to bring Bandera over here. And Stefan Bandera had a CIA code name. I think it was Cassowary 1 was his cryptonym. So he was
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's right. It's true. And you can find those documents in the CIA archives on their website at archives.gov.
Do you have those documents do you want to share now with us, Laurie? Because you do fantastic threads. Is there any new thread you have would you like to share to us?
I actually don't have those documents or those threads in front of me right now. I'm away from home this weekend traveling, but I'm just telling you this from memory because I'm so familiar with the documents now and have spent so much time with those documents that this is all just off the top of my head.
So speaking of that, Laurie, what is your, so as we all know in France right now, there's a lot of, riots going on with
Yeah.
mass immigration. That's to blame for a lot of it. What is your opinion on like the riots that are happening in France right now, of how bad it's getting? And do you think we're going to see a potential civil war, like civil unrest, in France? And what is your opinion about that 17-year-old, guy that got shot? He was Algerian and Moroccan, getting shot by the police officer. What do you think about the riots, and how do you think it's going to end?
That's a good question. As a historian, I take a longer view of things when they happen. And, this has been the history of France always, right? It's got a long history of violent uprisings, of violent clashes between the people and their government. And we're coming up on Bastille Day pretty soon.
Yep.
There's one example for you from history. So this may well escalate to that kind of level. I think the French people are furious at Macron and the way he's handled it by basically
Oh, Laurie,
ignoring
he
it.
is the worst leader
Yeah.
France has ever had. He honestly, well, the worst leader in probably this generation, like in the industrial era, like absolutely. Like he has turned France from a thriving democracy to just this dump. And it's the European Union. The European Union has turned countries like France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands to an absolute dump, and that's what the elitists want. Is because some people say that the European Union was created as the Fourth Reich
Mm-hmm.
to, destroy Western Europe. And it's just,
Mm.
anyway, like you were saying.
Well, I think it's interesting too that you know Macron is literally like Nero fiddling while Paris burns. He's out at an Elton John concert the other night, just blissfully unaware, it seemed, of what was going on across his own country, and it's obvious he doesn't care. Now, the French people, you would think, might be sharpening the guillotines for this guy. And many people are cheering that on. I hate to see that, though, because if that happens in France, it's going to have a reverberating effect around the world, and we will continue to see more and more of this violence, of governments being violently overthrown, a violent revolution and war. And that's the path that I'm trying so desperately to avoid, you know?
Yeah, to be honest, Laurie, I have a feeling that what's going to happen is I think they will get it under control. But one thing's for sure, whatever happens, Macron's gone. This is it for him. He's not going to last another term. He may even be forced to resign. I actually think it's going to be like the New Zealand Prime Minister, where he ends up resigning. Whoever comes in, I really think the next 4 years are going to be tough with France, because I did hear a rumor about, there was a funny conspiracy I actually saw, because, you did hear about France wanting to join BRICS, which was a bit silly. And I actually saw a comment where someone said, well, this is the CIA's punishment that they're giving to France for talking with China about joining BRICS. That's an interesting conspiracy. Yeah, you probably wouldn't hear that.
Well, I've got my own little conspiracy theory about that too. I think that perhaps a lot of this rioting is being done as kind of a color revolution, that there's manipulation from without. I don't think it's entirely organic. What I think is that we, the West and NATO, would much rather get rid of Macron and put in a puppet who's easier to control. I'm not a fan of Macron. I'm not defending him, but I will say that he's one of the few of the NATO countries who's had some reasonable dealings with Vladimir Putin, and who has not been as aggressive and militaristic as many of his other NATO partners in his dealings with Russia. So for that reason alone, I really would hate to see him replaced by a puppet who's far more aggressive and militaristic. And I'm afraid that that's what may ultimately come of this. And I think that when I look at these videos from France, it looks to me a lot like the George Floyd riots of 2020 here in the United States. And we now know that a lot of that was being funded by outside groups, and it wouldn't surprise me if our intelligence agencies are involved or something like that to try and effect a color revolution in France right now.
It's absolutely. I was just
And
reading
it's
here
easy
on
to
the
do
news.
because the people hate him so much, right? So
Oh,
it's easy
absolutely.
to get the
His
people
approval
to get
rating,
behind it.
his
Sometimes,
disapproval
you know,
rating is like 60%. It's so bad. I
be
was just
careful
reading
what you
like,
ask for. I'm just saying, be careful what you wish for. You might not
I
like
know,
who they replace him with.
oh, definitely not. I was just reading here. It says from the Gateway Pundit. This is an article called "France Has Fallen: Migrant Mob Torch Mayor's Home and Wife and Kid Injured Escaping." Wow,
Mm.
that's absolutely terrible.
Well, they torched an apartment building. Did you see that?
Yep, I know, absolutely
Full of
insane. It is
people.
just.
My God. Now that's when it goes from being a protest to an act of terror. You know,
Mhm.
that's not a protest, not a legitimate protest. You don't go burning down residential buildings with people in them. What the hell?
I also hear that Macron is thinking about putting down social media for like a few weeks, for like 2 weeks or something, just to sort this issue out. Which it's a bit scary because some people have been alluding to the fact that this could be, a scenario where they maybe use this as an excuse to bring in, lockdowns and internet censorship and more cyber attacks and stuff.
Right, right. But that's what these leaders always do in a moment of crisis, right? The first thing they want to do is shut down the internet so we can't get any information or news in or out. They
I
go
know.
into information blackout mode. And I don't see how that's in any way beneficial to the people of France or to the rest of the world.
Mhm.
It's only beneficial to Macron.
Laurie, what would you say is your favorite, type of French political philosophy that you really like that the French made?
Well, I'm a fan of the revolutionary period, of course. That's what I find so interesting. And I spend a lot of time studying those years of their history. It pains me to see these beautiful cities, and especially Paris, turning into shitholes. It was once such a beautiful place. And I look at it now and I think, my God, how could they let this happen to their country? And it's a warning to all of us Americans because I see it happening to our country too.
Oh,
And
I think it will happen once the United States dollar collapses. I think that is going to be the thing because I have a feeling what's going to happen is in 2024 they're going to have the war between China and Taiwan, and I think that war is going to end quicker than people expect. And then I think 2025 elections going to come around, and I think if Trump or Robert F. Kennedy win, I think what the globalist elite are going to do is one last resort. They're going to collapse the United States dollar, and I think. Oh, what do you think that would be like for you seeing that?
well, we're really dangerously close to that right now. I we're already in it. I mean, we're in a deep recession that's bordering on a depression. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit it. It's sort of like the meme, with the dog sitting there with a cup of coffee and the room's on fire around him, and the dog's like, "This
Mm.
is fine." That's the American people right now, as we're watching our economy just fall apart around us, and our society degenerate so much so quickly, and everyone and our border being overrun from the
Oh,
south.
I saw Robert F. Kennedy did joint. I saw him, going to visit the border. That was a very good thing of him to do that.
Oh, I love that. I love that. The only Democrat who's had the guts to do it. He did the thing
Tulsi
that Joe
Tulsi
Biden didn't
Gabbard
do. She's the
Tulsi
one doing it.
Gabbard did go and
Mhm,
visit.
mhm.
She did go and visit once.
Yeah. Yeah, she did. And the thing that I liked about the way Bobby did it was he went in the middle of the night. Most politicians go during the daytime business hours and they do an afternoon photo shoot and they're gone, do a quick press conference and they leave. But Bobby stayed on the border between Texas and Arizona for a couple of days. And he would go out at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because that's when the cartels are moving. That's when the drugs are moving across the border. It doesn't happen much during the daylight hours. It's always the overnight hours. So he went and watched and saw for himself what goes on during the overnight hours. That's something that no politician has the guts to do. Probably because they're scared of getting shot. Those cartels don't play.
Oh, they
right?
don't play. They're very violent. They're very vicious. And a lot of them are funded by the CIA. And just to let you know, like a month
Mhm.
ago, there was like a Mexican cartel member that pretty much came up from a weapon that came from Ukraine. And I wouldn't be surprised if
Ah,
the Ukrainian government is like shipping weapons from there to the cartel members. And maybe like going back to the scenario where I made up, where the potential civil war in the United States could happen, where a far left or far right group take the Capitol building. Maybe what will happen is the CIA would find a way to maybe, fund cartel members to take like a Capitol building and find a way, to
mm,
maybe, that could be a scenario if the United States was to, invade Mexico, maybe like fund a bunch of cartel members and then find a way for the United States to invade Mexico. Sorry about that if I'm going a bit off topic, but
no, I actually share that concern. I have had that concern ever since we left Afghanistan in 2021, and we started bringing in all these Afghanis unchecked, just whoever could get on the plane without checking out who they are, who they're connected to, what are their intentions in the United States. And we've got tons of Ukrainian refugees flooding across our southern border right now, too, right?
yeah.
Now, they say they're refugees coming to escape a
But
war.
they're actually not. A lot of them are
A lot
men.
of them are
A lot
not.
of them, are paid agents,
Mhm.
apparently. Same thing, with the ones going to Italy. They're not actually, women and children. They're actually men. It's insane.
Well, most of
There's
the people that I see coming across the southern border are not women and children. They are strapping, healthy, young, fighting age men, and they look like they're ready to fight. So, yeah, that concerns me. And it concerns me more that all they have to do to get into the country is literally just give the Border Patrol guy at the checkpoint the phone number of some friend in the United States where they can stay. And the Border Patrol calls that friend and says, "Do you know so and so?" And they say they can stay with you. Can you put them up until their court date? And the person says yes. Then the Border Patrol gives the guy or gal a plane ticket or bus ticket to wherever they want to go in the United States, wishes them well, gives them some food stamps and some free health care, and says, "Hey, you can stay here until your court date, which is 7 years in the future." So
oh,
it's
that's
basically just a
absolutely
free pass.
insane.
It's just a free pass to come on in the country.
What do
Go
you
ahead.
think? What do you think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would do better than Donald Trump would be if he was to become president? Because a lot of people say that Donald Trump ended, the immigrant cages where the kids were kept at, which was absolutely horrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, Obama did put kids in more cages than Trump did, but Trump still continued it. He still continued that
Mhm.
policy where he
Right.
was putting kids in the stage. And a lot of Republicans. What do you? And I mean, he did do Title 42 or 41, which
Mhm.
definitely was good. I mean, Trump definitely, did keep the border, under control better than the other presidents did. But what do you think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would do better than him?
Well, I like what I'm hearing from Bobby as far as his border policy, what he's detailed of it so far. He says that he would even close the border to put a stop to this, which is that's a step further than even Trump was willing to go. To close the border until we can get a handle on this, start sending these people back to restore an orderly process of bringing people across our border legally. I'm down with all that. I agree with all of that. He does say that we should complete the portions of the border wall that are still incomplete near, large populated areas and cities along the border. And as for the hinterlands, the regions where there aren't many people actually living out there, and that's most of our southern border. Most of our southern border is very rural. But as Kennedy points out, and he's right, we have all kinds of sensor technology and drone technology that can patrol those areas very effectively and show us when there's a group coming across a certain region of the border. Our sensors will get that, the drone cameras will get that, and we can dispatch border agents right to that location and pick them up. So, and most importantly, send them back and make them come across legally and go through the process like others do.
What do you think about the scenario? Just to let you know, I saw an interesting statistic. that more people are actually moving, like actually migrating from the United States to Mexico.
That's
And
a
I've
thing.
seen,
Yeah.
and I've seen a statistic where a lot of people say that Mexico is a dangerous country. Well, it is dangerous. I mean, Mexico
Oh,
has
yeah.
dangerous parts that are really dangerous.
So is
But
America.
the Western media never talks about the safe parts. Like one time I had a guy on my show who lives in Mexico, and he says it's not as bad as it is. Like Mexico is very beautiful. It's a very developing country. And the rumor is they could be joining BRICS. And a lot of people say that Mexico has a better future than the United States. It has very good engineers. Some of the cities are just as safe there. And the Mexican, what is your opinion on like hearing the news about more Mexican, migrants moving over to like more American, migrants moving over to Mexico? What is that opinion, towards that? And what is your opinions about the Mexicans who are complaining about all the Americans moving there and stuff like that? But yet America will blame, Mexico for the mass border crisis.
Yeah, well, welcome to prosperity, guys. You must be doing something right down there in Mexico. If the people who left your country to come here for a better life now want to come back home because the economy is healthier back home in Mexico, I see that as a good thing. And I have personal friends of mine. I lived in Texas for 25 years, so we dealt with this border crisis for a long time. It's just gotten a lot worse under Joe Biden, but this has been going on for a quarter century or longer. I know people who have done that, who've, bought a house down in Mexico, bought a beautiful house for a fraction of what they'd pay in the United States. And they live in a safe region. They feel safe and they love it down there. And the cost of living is much more affordable, much more manageable.
What country would you say is more safer now, Mexico or America?
That's a tough call. It depends on where you are in Mexico or in the United States. I mean, I live in Oklahoma and our crime rate is nothing like Baltimore, or Detroit, or Chicago, or New York, or California. Things are pretty good here. Our economy's cruising right along, and people in Oklahoma are pretty happy with their lifestyle. But I wouldn't want to live. You couldn't pay me to live in D.C. I've got dear friends who live right in the middle of Washington, D.C., and they've been afraid to leave their house for the last 2 or 3 years to go anywhere, to go to concerts or events or to have any fun or to ride the metro because there's so many random shootings and stabbings and junkies, camping out in the metro that they don't feel safe in these big cities going out.
It's
I can't say as I
terrible
blame
in
them.
Washington,
I
D.C.
keep telling them to move, get out here to the heartland. Come on out here and, come to Texas, come to Oklahoma, come to Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas. Water's fine. I think you'll like it a lot better and feel a lot safer, but better not come here if you're afraid of guns because we like guns. This is
They
Second
got a lot of
Amendment
guns in
country.
Mexico too. I've heard Mexico doesn't actually have that bad gun laws too. They actually can own a gun in Mexico,
Yeah. You have to apply for a permit and get permission from the government. But, I'm a firm believer that the reason we have a lower crime rate and safer cities here in the Midwest and in the South is because we believe in the Second Amendment and because
Yeah.
we pack. I mean, here in Oklahoma, we don't even have to conceal our firearm. It's an open carry state. So, you can be out at the grocery store and the guy next to you's got a firearm on his belt. And I think that's a very powerful deterrent. If some fool's going to come in there and try to shoot up the store, there's a lot of good guys with guns.
He'll get shot.
by.
He'll get shot.
That's
He'd just
right.
be a stupid idiot to do that.
That's right.
Lori, you probably saw that Douglas McGregor, that's his name, right? You've had him on before, haven't
Colonel
you?
McGregor?
Douglas,
Sure.
Colonel McGregor, yeah. Which kind of has the same name as Ewan McGregor, the actor. With Colonel McGregor, when he was on an interview, by the way, this really good show called Val Entertainment's hosted by this guy called Patrick.
Oh,
and
sure.
he's
Yeah,
very, very, very good at post. Brings on different people.
He does have good guests, really good guests.
I think you would be a very good guest. If Patrick, if you're hearing this, get Laurie Spencer on your show. Very good guest she is. She's very good, very knowledgeable, and very underrated. Speaking of that, though, I saw when he was talking, Patrick asked him, do you think, what is your opinion, towards the 2024 election? And Douglas McGregor said something very scary, and he said that he doesn't think the United States is going to make it until 2024. He thinks that things are going to go tits up, and he thinks there's going to be a scenario where, where the banks are going to be closed, like for 3 weeks. What is your view in that? Like, do you think it will get as bad as he says it does? Or do you think the United States will be able to find a way, especially, with BRICS coming, because BRICS has their summits? Or do you think that we're going to see the Chinese dollar take over the United States dollar sooner than expected?
I saw that interview with Colonel McGregor, and I know the clip you're talking about, and boy, it made my jaw drop. To hear that coming from a man like him, who's usually very conservative and never given to hysteria, to hear a comment like that coming from him really made me think about where we're headed and how quickly this is all happening. That's why we call Joe Biden the quicker fucker upper, because I have never, ever in my life seen any.
That's a new one. I've never had him.
I've never seen anybody fuck up a country this fast. We've just
because he's not president. He's a puppet. He's a puppet from the Rothschild, the Rockefellers, the bankers. They're the ones controlling him.
Well, they clearly have no idea how to run a country. Whoever's running the country while Joe Biden takes a nap, they're not very good at this. They suck at their jobs, and we're stuck.
Well, they don't care. They're not meant to, make the United States a paradise. They're only using him as a shield because they just want to wreck the United States.
Well, it was difficult for me to hear that from Colonel McGregor, because maybe it was a shot of reality that I needed to hear, because I'm the eternal optimist, and because I do see hope on the horizon when I look at.
Hope. Laurie, I'll tell you this. A lot of people say that, the elite are winning. I don't think they are. Now, look, the elite will throw new things at us. Climate lockdowns, whether it will be a new civilian law or some censorship law. But the one positive thing that COVID brought in is a lot of people woke up. A lot of people realized that this world is controlled by bankers and elitists. And I think what we are seeing now, especially with the BRICS nations coming together, and especially with Russia winning the war against Ukraine, which is a war against the establishment and the elites, I think the elite are on their last legs. I think the elite are about to fall. And I think by the end of this decade and next decade, I think we will win. Maybe the world will be in a dire state, but I think we'll win. I think the elite are dying. And yeah, I honestly think we're winning. I think people may not see it, but, look, obviously the United States will probably not survive. It will probably end up like the dollar is going to collapse. Whatever you say, even if it's Trump, even if it's Robert Kennedy, $31 trillion in debt, you've got a fentanyl crisis, you've got this and all that. It's going to be hard to survive. But the world is going to be multipolar, and that's a good thing. The world's going to be multipolar because BRICS is a good thing. BRICS is going to help nations like Algeria, Morocco, Rwanda, other African nations that, China has done a lot of good to help develop. It's going to help South American countries, and it's a good thing. And, I even heard rumors Germany might be joining BRICS. And I think, as soon as the European Union begins to collapse, I have a feeling that, Germany, will also find a way. But as for Western Europe, though, and the United States, I just don't know. I think they're on their way downhill.
Well, I obviously the new multipolar world order is coming. And the only question is, what kind of leader will we choose? Do we want to choose a leader who's going to continue to resist the inevitable, another Joe Biden, or even a Donald Trump? Donald Trump is not ready for BRICS. He made it very clear also in his recent rhetoric that he doesn't want communists migrating here, people from communist countries.
Yeah, what is your
feeling want Marxists coming here? Now that's Cold War talk. I don't like to hear that.
When you heard that say, right, when you heard that say, by the way, my mate Commie Hunter, me and him were talking about this. Commie Hunter, if you're listening to this, just get onto this. Sorry, we were talking about this the other day. When you hear like Donald Trump saying, about how he wants to ban Marxists and economists. Now, look, I'm not a fan of economism. I think it's got its flaws. But United States is supposed to be a constitutional republic where it's supposed to be free. And for Donald Trump to ban economists and Marxists and stuff like that. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, the third word.
Mhm.
That's unconstitutional. That, like, I'm sorry, but Trump, mate, Red Scare tactic, hello, that's not very good.
Exactly. And that's why I think that Trump would not be the best leader in 2024, even though I don't hate Donald Trump. I truly believe that Kennedy is, because he's the only one that I see currently running for president who is realistic about this new multipolar world order that is coming. And rather than fighting it and trying to resist it, he wants to work within it. He
I think
wants
it'll be
to.
great. I think China, Russia, and India, when they become the world superpowers, I think they're going to be peaceful. China,
Well,
look,
we could be peaceful if we would just stop the militarization. If we would
oh,
close down our
absolutely.
military bases around the world.
China, one thing that China has said is, now look, I've got a lot of right winger friends. No disrespect to you guys. I think you guys are awesome. We're all out our opinions. You get what I mean? But I lived in Hong Kong, Laurie, for 6 years. I lived in Hong Kong for 6 years before I lived in New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
And I think Hong Kong is much better under China than it is in Hong Kong. A lot of people have more rights. And I think, you get the Hong Kong protests, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
China has done a lot of good work to help African countries like Ethiopia, Algeria, Rwanda develop. They're helping to build Iran. They're helping to rebuild Syria. Same thing with Russia. Maybe the Chinese government are doing some bad things. They're not perfect. I don't think they're as good as the Russian government or the Indian government, but they're doing a lot of work. And the one thing the CPP has said is, look, we don't want to invade other countries. That's not our interest.
That's right.
And it's funny how the United States go on about, China's the biggest threat in the world. By the way, Donald Trump just came out and said that Russia and China are not our biggest enemy. So that's kind of a wake-up call. That's the United States government.
Well, we have 800 military bases around the world.
Exactly.
In the United States. You know how
They'll
many military
say
bases the Chinese have around the world?
one. Yep.
Yeah.
And
So,
I mean, Russia probably. How many Russia have? They might have one, don't they?
that I do not know. I would have to look that one up.
Russia, and you know what? There was a bit of a scandal going on where China wanted to build a military base in Cuba. And the United States is like, oh, and then everybody says Iran's a big threat to the Middle East. Well, how is Iran a big threat to the Middle East? Look at all the military bases around Iran. It's like, bro.
Right? How dare you put your country so close to our military bases? You're obviously a terrorist threat if you have your country in our way.
I'm not saying Iran's perfect. I mean, they've definitely got their problems too. They're a developing country, but still, and you know what? They say Iran is the biggest, funder of terrorists in the world. Hello, the United States government is. The CIA are. The British government is.
This is an interesting story, Welsh. I don't know if you heard this, but you remember when they did that drone attack on the Kremlin last month? I think it was like on May 3rd or so. The day before that, Vladimir Putin made a statement that must have had reverberations in Langley. He said that the CIA, most of the terrorist acts in the world today, 95% of them, he said, are committed by the CIA. And then the very next day, they send a drone at the Kremlin to try and kill him. Somebody did.
He said that a long time ago too. Personally, look, I'll disagree with Putin on this. I think maybe 60 to 55%. But yeah, he's right. Majority of it is done by the CIA and the FBI. Absolutely, 100%.
Is that an old quote? Has he been saying that for a while?
He has been saying that for a while. He did say that, but he just probably, updated it just to let people know that he says this quote,
Ah, interesting. I didn't know that. So speaking of the bad things that, since we're sitting here just bashing on America on the 4th of July, while we're at it, I have another grievance that I want to air about what my country is doing, and that is the persecution of Julian Assange.
Yep, as we all know. So what is, Laurie, I actually have been following a lot of it. So tell me in the audience what is going on with the Julian Assange situation and what is going to be happening going forward.
Well, his extradition to the United States looks to be imminent. It could happen any day now. Within the next week, 2 weeks, he's basically exhausted every appeal at this point, and the High Court in England doesn't even want to hear his case. So it looks, unless the Home Secretary or the King puts a stop to it, or the President of the United States issues a preemptive pardon, which we don't think is likely. Joe Biden has made it very clear for a long time that he hates WikiLeaks. He called Julian Assange an information terrorist. He's definitely not a fan, and I don't see a pardon or any mercy to be shown by this president. We have tried.
Well, does he even know? Does he? Isn't he? Is he even going to be even able to know what it is, especially with how he's struck?
I don't even think he knows what's going on or what day of the week it is. I mean, he's talking to dead people. Joe Biden's having conversations with dead people. So he's not aware of what's going on. And I don't think that he would sign a pardon. I don't think anyone would put that pardon in front of him to sign. Stella, Julian's wife, she actually had.
Oh yes, sorry, it wasn't
an audience with the Pope.
It was his wife. Sorry, I got that wrong earlier, Laurie, when we were talking before the show. Stella, yes, that's his name. Her name.
Yeah, and she and her children, their children, had a private audience with the pontiff, with the Pope. Was it yesterday, day before? And so there's a lot of international support for Julian's case, and strangely enough, even Australia is starting to get on board with the freedom.
And New Zealand too. There's a lot of people here in New Zealand who are supporting it,
About time. Welcome aboard. We've been waiting for you. So we are just, trying to raise the alarm that the clock is ticking. His appeals have all been exhausted. And this is our last chance, if we have a chance, to stop the extradition of Julian Assange. And it's going to take people. It's going to take getting in the streets. Finally, it's going to take large numbers of people raising hell about this to call Congress, call the White House, pick up the phone. That's even more effective than an email. A phone call is much more effective than an email. An email they can easily ignore. Phone calls, they actually have to have a secretary sit there and take that call or record that voicemail. Most importantly, you can get in the streets. And I think that that's what must happen. They're already doing it in Britain. They've been having big protests at Parliament. But here in the States, the protests happen, but they're usually pretty small. And they need to be big, 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 big. If we're going to save this man's life.
Donald Trump, for him, I really think it would be very good for him to pardon Assange. I really think what he should do if he was to become president, he said, look, I thought Assange was a criminal, but I've changed my mind after seeing the shit that, I went through, which we can agree.
And now, the irony is that they're now charging Donald Trump with violating the Espionage Act.
Which is ridiculous because you had Biden who created files, Obama, but Donald Trump should come in and say, look, I made a mistake. Whatever, Julian Assange is free because the government came after
Trump's never going to admit he made a mistake. Trump never admits to a mistake. But he could say, I changed my mind. That's not necessarily admitting you made a mistake. You could just say, I saw some evidence that changed my mind, right? He could do that, Welsh, but I think it's highly unlikely that he will do that, because he's still surrounded by swamp creatures. And don't forget that even back in 2010, long time ago, Donald Trump, and there's a video of it circulating, he was interviewed on Fox News about WikiLeaks, and he said that he thought Julian Assange ought to get the death penalty. That was in 2010. That was in 2010.
I didn't know that. Yep. Do you have a link to it or no?
I can find it for you. It's out there. It exists.
Sure. Nice.
Yeah. So I really don't think Trump is going to do that, considering that Trump's the one who had him arrested to begin with. Trump had every opportunity over those, 2 years that he was still president. He could have pardoned Assange at any time. He could have directed the Justice Department to drop the charges. He did not. So I think we know where Trump stands, and I don't think he's going to change his mind. But there's a little hope. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has said that on his first day in the White House, he would pardon Julian Assange. Better yet, he would also pardon Edward Snowden. He
Yeah.
would upgrade Chelsea Manning's
What about Ross?
conversation to a
What
full
about
pardon.
Ross Ulbricht? What about Ross Ulbricht?
He was asked about that just a couple of days ago, specifically about the Russ Ulbricht case. He was asked about that at Pork Fest, which is a libertarian gathering every year in New Hampshire.
Also very anarchist, isn't it? It's got anarchists too.
Yeah, it is. So, of course, they asked him about the Russ case. And he said that, and it was an honest answer. He said that from what he understood of the case, it sounded like Russ shouldn't spend his life in prison, but he didn't commit because he said he really didn't know enough about it yet. And he wants to do his homework before he commits to a full pardon. But he did promise to take a look at that case. And he seemed to demonstrate, I think, a pretty good knowledge of what that case is all about. So he wasn't unaware of it. And he probably knows more about that case than Trump ever knew about the Assange case. Trump proved himself ignorant of the facts time and time and time again. And usually when Trump was asked about the WikiLeaks case, he would always just kind of shrug his shoulders and go, I don't know anything about it. I never heard of WikiLeaks. I don't know. So Trump would just play dumb. And maybe he is dumb about it. Maybe he is as dumb as he sounds when it comes to
how I view Trump is, Laurie. By the way, there are a lot of Trump supporters watching this who I'm friends with. I've got nothing against you guys. I think you guys are all cool. We're all out our opinion. You get what I mean. Respect to you guys. Keep up the good. Sorry about that. I'm just a bit. I'm over-worrying a bit.
I had on my show, Strange Bedfellows, the podcast I do last night. I had a great debate with the biggest Trump supporter I've ever known.
Is he a nice guy?
He's been my best friend for 40 years. He's listening right now. He's tuned into your show because
really? Hey mate, how are you? Oh no, I'm guilty.
Say hi, Paul.
Oh no, I feel very bad for talking about. I was kidding, mate.
No, you're gonna love this, mate. He's actually Welsh. He's from Wales. He lives in the United States, but he's native Welsh. So I thought you might like that. And we had a great talk last night on Strange Bedfellows. You know, I'm a Kennedy supporter. I'm a volunteer recruiter. I work on Kennedy's campaign, and I make no bones about it. I think Kennedy's the best man for the job. But we had a great debate because Paul is the biggest Trump fan that I know. I mean, he's literally got a museum in his house of Trump memorabilia, and the precinct chair for his local county precinct, and very devoted Republican. So we had a great debate about RFK Jr. versus Trump, and if it were a head-to-head match next November, who would win and who should win. And
wow,
it's a wonderful debate because we're the best of friends. So it stayed civil and friendly, and we never got to, throwing insults at one another. It's not that kind of a debate.
By the way, there's a girl called Art of Dominique here. She says, still here, and sorry, the screen is going a bit slow at the moment. Sorry, Dominic, the connection's a bit strange.
Canadian.
She says she is Canadian.
I'm on a Canadian news show, a couple of times a week. I'm on Maverick News with Rick Walker, which is
Maverick News is Canadian. Wow.
Yeah, Rick's up in Canada. God. He's in Ontario, and I'm the American correspondent down here in the States. But shout out to Maverick News.
And to the Dominique, who's from Canada. That's a French name, Dominique is.
Yes, I might think she is from the French provinces of Canada. Canada. As they say.
So, Laurie, who do you think should be Robert F. Kennedy's vice VP? Some people say, what's the other woman's name? What's her name? Williamson?
Oh, Marianne Williamson.
Yeah. Marianne Williamson would be good. Some people say that, Trump should join sides with him, but that'll never happen. Some people say Tulsi Gabbard. Who do you think should be his VP?
Well, that's a choice that only Bobby Kennedy can make, and I hope he chooses very carefully because he knows there's a target on his back, right? We know what they did to his Uncle Jack. We know what they did to his father, and he knows there's a target on his back. If he should be so lucky, so blessed to make it to the White House, he's going to need a vice president that he can trust, just in case. So I think, or who I would like to see, would be Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, same here.
I
I
think
think
our country
Tulsi
would
would
be in
be.
very, very good hands with Tulsi if anything happened to Bobby. You know,
Yeah, I think
um,
Tulsi would be brilliant. I think Ron Paul's son would be outstanding, even though he's not a Democrat or a libertarian. But
oh
it
yeah, I
feels
love
like,
Rand Paul. Yeah, but
yeah,
he's
Ron
in the
Paul's
Trump
son. Ron
camp.
Paul's
He's so
friend.
loyal to Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to switch teams. I think he's going to stick with Trump.
I personally, if I had a choice as a libertarian, there's not really any libertarian candidates who impress
Not
me.
yet.
I would
Yeah, not
personally
yet.
like Ron Paul's, Rand Paul to run as a libertarian and have Larry Sharpe as the vice president. But
Ooh.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with Tulsi would be very good. But you know what's funny? It doesn't even feel like Robert F. Kennedy's running for the Democrats. He feels like he's running for more like a third party. Same with Trump. That's like the feeling I get.
Well, I have been saying jokingly, but not jokingly, these past couple of weeks that it's great that Bobby's doing all the right wing and independent media and did the Joe Rogan show and I'm like, you're doing a great job winning over Republicans and libertarians and independents, Bobby. Keep that up. But don't forget, you're running in the Democratic Party primaries. It's the Democrats you have to convince because you're doing well with the independents and the centrists. You're doing good with them, but they can't and probably won't vote in the Democratic Party primary. So you're going to have to find a way to reach Democrats and get them to vote for you. That's the challenge. And right
Yeah.
now, I mean, there's hardly any left wing media that will have him on. All the
Oh, none.
podcast
The
invitations and
CNN,
requests are for the.
won't have him on. It's
And if they do, they try and treat him like he's a nut, or they try to make
well.
him look bad. They won't give him a fair interview, fair hearing.
What is your opinion on the other girl, Marianne Williamson?
Um, Not really a big fan. I disagree with a lot of her policies, primarily Ukraine. She supports Ukraine. She wants to keep arming and funding them, and that's a deal breaker for me. Fortunately, I have a candidate that I'm excited about in Kennedy. So, I'm glad I have an option because I could not bring myself to support any pro-war candidate. That's why I can't get excited about DeSantis or some of the
Oh
other
my God,
Republicans.
Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
He is, well, that's another story for another date.
Yeah.
So, Laurie, before we finish up, is there anything else you would like to say to the audience and me?
Yes, I would like to tell everybody within the sound of our voices tonight that we are having a birthday party. I guess you'd call it a party, a birthday vigil for Julian Assange tonight. It's going to be on Twitter Spaces. So we want to do it on Twitter Spaces because you can reach so many people around the world and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything if you want to speak, if you want to ask a question or participate. All you need is a cell phone and an internet connection and you can join. So you don't have to wait, you don't have to spend money for a phone call or anything like that. We're going to start this space tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And the idea is to start the space in the United States and try to keep it going. We've got a whole lot of really excellent guest speakers taking part. So I think once everyone's had their say, it'll probably be the middle of the night, our time, but it'll be early morning over there, your time. So the idea is that our friends across the pond, over there in England, across Europe, in Australia, and around the world can join us as they wake up and start their day. And this Twitter space is going to be moderated by myself and my Maverick News co host, Rick Walker. And we've got an amazing lineup of speakers. We've got Scott Ritter, we've got Jose Vega, we've got Diane Sayre, the U.S. Senate candidate. We've got the chair, the national chair of the Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle. Will be
I've
speaking.
had her on twice. She's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Very,
okay. Yeah, Angela. She's great. And we're going to have Misty Winston.
Misty,
Sarcasm
yeah.
Stardust. She's going to be
Misty, I've
speaking.
seen some of her work before.
She's wonderful. She's on TNT Radio Live. Caleb Maupin, who's a reporter for RT Television, and Jay Scott, host of the Jay Scott Ascension. And gosh, who else? We've got Craig Yopasta from the Convo Couch.
Yeah,
Will
I've
be
had
there.
Craig on. I've had Craig on.
Have you?
I know
Oh,
him.
he's great. And Kynan Thistlewhite from Declaring Independence, the podcast with Jose Vega. I had Kevin Gustola confirmed, and then he just messaged me a little while ago saying he has a family situation come up, but he will try to join us if we're still going when all that's over with. And some surprise guests too, who don't want to publicize their appearance, but they might just kind of show up and surprise us. So some friends, some family of Julian's, a lot of journalists and people who care. And we just want to get as many people together to remember him on his birthday, to pray for him, to send a message to the world that somebody cares. And you know, it amazes me that nobody else was doing a Twitter space for Julian. So that's why I started it. I'm a Twitter Spaces host.
Everybody should be doing a Twitter space to him,
We're
even
the only
conservatives and
one. And I
leftists.
thought, man,
Because he's one guy who's really exposed, you know, the elite in a way with their crimes, what they want to do to this world. It's just.
And think of all the things we wouldn't know if it wasn't for Julian Assange. You know,
Nope, we wouldn't know a lot.
There's so much that we wouldn't know. And we should thank him, and we should pardon him. And in my opinion, we should pin a medal on him for all that he's endured. And most of all, we should pay him. We should compensate Julian and his family for the horrible things that we've done to them. And we should apologize. But you know, the Americans never apologize. There's a joke, and it's not a joke. We say being American means never having to say you're sorry. So it seems like, you know, even if we give Julian a pardon, we will never lower ourselves to apologize, even though we owe him a great big fat apology. And there's only one politician that I know of who's willing to do that, and that's Robert Kennedy Jr. He's the kind of guy who would hand Julian a pardon and an apology.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie. It was a pleasure having you again for the second time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love talking to you, Welsh.
Thanks. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast episode 117. Please go and check Laurie's stuff out. She's a fantastic podcast. Actually, before we go, where can people find you, Laurie? Sorry about
that. I was sitting here talking about this big Twitter space, and people are like, great, okay, where do I find you on Twitter? You can find me at Real Laurie Spencer on Twitter. And the Twitter space info for Julian Assange, if you'd like to join, is pinned right at the top of the page. So come join us tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, until whenever we decide to stop talking about Julian. But we're going to keep this going as long as we can.
Yeah. Anyways, like I said, everybody, go subscribe, check out Laurie. She's a fantastic journalist. Very good. I also say free Julian Assange. He's an absolutely important guy. Happy birthday to him. And I wish him, you know, freedom for all. And happy 4th of July to Americans. Happy 4th of July to you guys too. And you too, Laurie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast episode 117. Please remember to like and subscribe, everybody. Share this video around. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. And goodbye for now.